Hi, head people. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you may be on the face of the planet. My name is Tosin Kolaole, and I'm pleased to welcome you to my climate story with Tosin. And today we have a very special guest with us, who has seen it all. His name is Rituraj Phukan. He's National Coordinator for Biodiversity for the Climate Reality Project in India, and he's made some series of you know contributions to the environment space over the years, including his expedition to the Arctic and also to the Antarctica. Um, Welcome, Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Tosin. It's such a pleasure to be here with you to share my climate story. Hello to all the
Also,
viewers.
hi. Yes. By the way, can we start? Who is Mr. Richard?
I am from Assam, uh, which is a state in the northeast of India. Maybe I'll just share my screen for a moment to just give a perspective of where it is located.
Great.
And So Assam is in the northeast of India, as you can see. Uh, it's one of the greenest areas in the country and famous for the great Indian one-horned rhinoceros. And
Mhm.
this is where I was born, and this is where I grew up. Uh, and For many years, I was working with wildlife conservation and starting off with wild birds, especially the greater Edgerton stork, and then went on to work with elephants, especially with the human-elephant conflict mitigation efforts with
For
my
many years, I
NGO,
was working with
the the Green Guard Nature Organization, and
mm,
over the course of the years, especially when I watched An Inconvenient Truth, uh, I somehow felt like all of this is connected to climate change, and especially my state, Assam, where I was born, is very prone to a lot of things that we are talking about these days when we talk about the impacts of climate change, like floods and droughts and erosion, displaced people, and all kinds of conflict between humans as well as human and wildlife. Uh, so it made me a climate activist. I got into the climate sphere, and of course, the next step was getting trained as a climate reality leader. So that's it in brief about mm, me, as you wanted me to introduce myself.
oh, sorry. Thank you. That was quite informative. And so, but was that what actually gave birth to the passion you had to work for climate justice?
Yes,
Mm,
the more I hear about climate justice, the more I was convinced that this is something that needs to be really addressed, especially after what I have seen working with some of the most water stressed communities across
mm,
India. As we all know that the water crisis is the worst manifestation of the climate crisis in India. And for several years, we have heard about farmers committing suicide. We have heard
mm,
about a lot of, you know, a lot of droughts happening. We have heard about cities running out of water, and then at the same time, we also hear about some, new areas being prone to floods. Uh,
mm,
so so many of these people are very poor and marginalized farmers, and
mm,
I think when we talk about climate justice, these people are at the forefront, and they are
mm,
the ones who need to be addressed. In fact, I had the opportunity to meet one of the great climate justice movement leaders, Dr. Robert Bullard, at a climate reality training where I was a mentor at Houston in 2016, and that really got me thinking that yes, there are so many places I have uh, been to across India, and so many communities that I have worked to with in terms of whether they're impacted by extreme weather events in the coastal areas or the water crisis or human wildlife conflicts, but nobody is aware of the climate justice movement. And I think that's a big gap because these people are actually uh, at the forefront of this climate impacts. And if anybody needs to be supported by this climate justice movement, it's these people, the poor, marginalized people who do not even know what's happening.
So can you describe to us what kind of feelings do you have when you see like the people you just described, the poor and the marginalized frontline communities who are suffering from the impact of climate change without help? What kind of feelings do you have? Can you describe the kind of reaction that comes from you naturally?
Well, the first and foremost feeling that anybody would actually get is uh, just a feeling of sorrow, of sadness, because uh, most of these people who are poor and marginalized, you know, are basically helpless. Many of them are also uh, illiterate, not educated enough to find alternative livelihoods, and because they are impoverished, they are caught in this uh, you know uh, they're basically exposed to the vagaries of nature, to extreme weather events, and they're so dependent on the weather for the agricultural requirements, for the water needs. And suppose the weather affects them so badly, many of them are forced to turn to the forest, and many of them are driven to suicide, as we have seen in the last many years. So at the same time, I would say that a lot of young people are coming up who are aware of these problems, and who are determined to make a difference. We have seen the climate awareness movement growing, the environmental movement growing across the country, and powered by the youth. And so the overwhelming feeling, though, is of sadness and helplessness, but at the same time, there is some hope, especially with the way the youngsters are, building up the momentum for climate action.
Thank you. There is hope, but sometimes when I consider what my age to some of the young people who are leading the climate cause at this point in time, and for me, I kind of feel like I should have more reason to want to join or to want to lead one of those campaigns, because I in my own local context, I remember growing up, I used to go visit my grandmother, and they, it's in the village, and they had a stream close by where we go, to bath and all that. So some 15 years ago, we just noticed that the stream just started, drying up and all that, and now that stream has been lost. And so my fear is, I don't know if that's a representation of some other stream around the world. I have this sense of sadness over what I've lost, what is lost to me, and potentially what could be lost. Now, if you look back in your own context growing up, what are those things that you feel is lost, or do you have fears about that could be lost if we do not do anything about climate change now?
Yes, I think there have been profound changes. In fact, I live in the very close to the eastern Himalayan region, which has already warmed by about 1.3 degrees Celsius. So it's faster than the rest of the world. And while growing up, we used to have floods, maybe a couple of times every year. But in the last few years, I have seen that the intensity and the frequency of floods have increased. Uh, And besides that, there has been so much of disruption of lives and livelihoods. There is so much of
mm,
land lost to erosion. People have been displaced, not only within my state, but people who have been displaced in neighboring areas, in neighboring countries, have moved in. So there have been, a lot of conflicts, societal conflicts between people who have come in and people who have been there from before. Uh, then there has been a lot of issues about wildlife. You know, we have rhinos and tigers and elephants. So we
mm,
have issues about wildlife straying into, um, out of protected areas into
mm,
human settlements. A lot of casualties on both sides, human and wildlife. So all this is something that has changed the what my state used to be, my region used to be, for the worse. I mean,
mm,
these are all, the green cover has decreased. The rainfall, which used to be so nice and predictable, has the patterns have changed. So I feel the balance, there's a disbalance in society overall. So we have lost that fine balance,
mm,
that we had when I was growing up, between nature and people, between human and wildlife,
mm,
between different groups of people, different communities. I think all of that fine balance we had, that made my state one of the most pleasant weather, uh,
mm,
peaceful states
mm.
in the entire country, full of biodiversity, uh, very fertile land, and but all that has really changed. So I think, yeah, that must be one of the main
Mm.
impacts that I have seen.
Great. Thank you so much for describing some of the local and national impact you've experienced about climate change. And at some point, you've also gone internationally. You've been to the Arctic, and that's what was the your observation experience going on tour to the Arctic?
So with your permission, I will like to share the screen so that I can show some
Okay, okay, please.
images. Uh, so very quickly about my climate journey. Actually, I became a climate activist only when I reached Antarctica, and and the first act of activism I did was this holding up this banner in support of the Pacific Warriors. Uh, this was on the 2nd of March, 2013, when the Pacific Warriors were celebrating this day called, we are fighting, we are not drowning. And then
Mm,
uh, people across the world were doing this solidarity events, and I did it from Antarctica. So this is where I started. uh, I could see a lot of impacts across the remotest and the most beautiful. Some people call it the last great wilderness. Uh,
mm,
Even out there, it's so far away, but you can still see the impacts of climate change. And there are so many innocent birds and animals, but all of them have been impacted. Uh, we are supposed to stay away, but they were so innocent, and they are not at all used to human beings. So they
mm,
would come very close to us, in fact. Unfortunately, at the same time, we learned that different types of wildlife are been affected by climate in a different way. For example, the population of this Adélie penguins had decreased by about 50%
mm,
because of the loss of sea ice, whereas the Gentoo, which are not very dependent on sea ice, have actually increased in numbers because
mm,
of climate change. So there have been a lot of impacts. And then this was, of course, one of the most significant moments in my journey. This is a piece of the Larsen B ice shelf, which started to uh, collapse back in 2002, when not many people believed in climate change. And when it started to collapse, actually scientists were thinking that it would probably take a long time to actually totally disintegrate and break away, but it did actually break off within uh, 3 or 4 weeks of starting to collapse, and then this was one tabular iceberg that we saw 11 years later. Uh, this was the Larsen B ice shelf. So immediately after that, I got a chance to go to Istanbul, and then I got trained as a climate reality leader. And even that training for me was very significant, because those days people at the youth, especially at Istanbul, were fighting to save this green uh, place called the Gezi Park, right in the middle of the Taksim Square. And the government wanted to cut down all these trees and construct a shopping mall. So while walking to the training venue is to participate in this, and then on the last day of the training there was a big riot, and the government sent in forces. So I was stuck in the riots, and I had to take shelter in a local family with a local family after getting tear gas repeatedly. So I got a lesson here itself, that the fight will not be easy. It's going to be very tough. And then of course I continued with climate reality, and I got the honor of being featured by Mr. Gore in his sequel to the An Inconvenient Truth, known as the Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power, published in 2017. uh, so I will stop sharing at this moment, and then maybe we'll come back to this later.
Okay, thank you. With what you saw on your trip to the Arctic, why what form of concern do you have? Is it that of hope, or fear of, or why should we be worried, or do we have any reason to be worried about what's happening in the Arctic?
Yes, absolutely. I think the polar regions are the air conditioners of the planet, right? We all know it. There is enough ice locked in the two polar regions to raise the global sea levels very significantly over 70 to maybe 100 feet, which will drown out a lot of our coastal cities and other coastal areas. So the maps of the world will basically change.
Hmm,
But Antarctica, for a long time, it's not been too much of a concern, though it is increasingly uh, getting worried, causing headaches to researchers because of the melting in the Larsen Sea, which broke off 2 years back,
hmm,
then as well as the Thwaites Glacier, which is now starting to crack. But even greater concern is, of course, the Arctic region,
hmm,
because, as they say, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It
hmm,
affects us all. It
hmm,
affects global weather. It affects, if I talk about my region, it affects the South Asian monsoons, because of the way the uh, ocean circulate, and how the way the winds of the world circulate. So it's going to have a very significant impact on weather patterns, on rainfall, and the loss of sea ice. It's not just a loss of habitat for the polar bears, but
hmm, hmm,
it's affecting, because the Arctic is inhabited, right? There are 8 countries there, unlike Antarctica where nobody lives. In
hmm,
Arctic, there are 8 countries. People have lived in that region for you know tens of thousands of years. They are dependent on, for example, they're dependent on the reindeer,
hmm.
the Svalbard reindeer. But uh, again, that's something of concern. Let me quickly share my screen, because there was something about the Arctic. I think I should just show there. So during my journey, I went to another place called Churchill,
Mhm,
and just one moment. So Churchill is known as the polar bear capital of the world, as well as uh, beluga whale capital of the world. And this bear was, you know, I saw this bear about 10 minutes after I reached that place. You can see the train line behind. So that actually is the one of the climate impacted train lines in the world, and it closed down for most of the time since I went there by train, because the entire railway track is on permafrost, and because of the
mm, mm,
instability
mm,
due to melting, it's now
mm,
shut down. This is the Churchill Northern Studies Center, where a lot of research is going on about how vegetation and the the ecosystem of the entire Arctic is changing. So these are profound lessons that I got there, and we did a lot of field work looking at how uh, you know the the international tundra experiment about how the vegetation is shifting, how the boreal forests are moving to the north, how the tundra is changing, as well as how microorganisms are affected by warming, and how dependent there are two types of frogs and three kinds of skittlefish that survive the 8 months freezing in the wetlands of this region, and how they are responding to the changes in temperature. So all of these studies, this is the ITEX, of course. So I got a opportunity to be part of that. And then of course there's this uh, the only polar bear jail in the world, where uh, polar bears that repeatedly come into town are put in. And the reason they come in is because the Hudson Bay, where the polar bears hunt, is
mm,
melting so much
mm,
later,
mm,
uh, and and it's freezing much later. So the window of hunting seals for the polar bear has
mm,
decreased.
mm,
So, and because they're opportunistic hunters, they come into town in search of food. So, so this is actually very symbolic of the polar bears. And then I've been to the Arctic again, and I'm coming to the Svalbard reindeer when you asked me that. So when I went here in June 2019, last year, the same week, about 200 of these beautiful reindeers died of starvation, and they died because it was raining there rather than snowing. And when it rains, the after some time it freezes into hard ice, and the reindeer are unable to break through the ice to reach the vegetation. If it is snow, they can reach the vegetation. So this was something very unfortunate that I saw with my experience with myself when I was there. We found that the sea ice was very less, up to 80-degree north. And when we saw this polar bears, it was really sad because they look very stressed out, and you can see the snow. It is dark, and
mm,
many places it had melted. So the Arctic is really changing. I went on another expedition and engaged with a lot of local communities across Scandinavia, uh, especially in the Lapland Arctic region, where people are very dependent on reindeers. And
mm,
we learned that the reindeer sizes are decreasing. They are becoming more prone to disease. Uh,
mm,
the number of mosquitoes and black flies have increased. So baby reindeers are not making it. So there's so much of immense changes, and that is one of the reasons I am part of this initiative called the Marine Arctic Peace Sanctuary, from a group called Parvati Foundation. And here, what as an ambassador, I speak that we propose that all the areas north of the Arctic Circle should be protected, should be declared as a peace sanctuary, so that no kind of exploitative tourism or mining or drilling,
mm,
all such exploitative activities are stopped. Many scientists have said that we need to protect at least one half of the planet, and
mm,
in the Arctic, we have one of the most important areas which is affecting, which is suffering from the impacts of climate change more than any other in the world, and affecting global weather patterns, people, and biodiversity. So let us all you know fight to create the Marine Arctic Peace Sanctuary maps. I think which will go a long way in a quick, I think, which is a very immediate response, doable response to
mm.
the climate and ecological crisis. And of course, I'm going to stop the slide share so that we can talk more. But I love this quote by the leader of one of my expeditions to the Arctic, as well as the one that I went to the Antarctic. And this actually gives me the hope and the reason for being a climate activist. And he says the greatest threat to the planet is the belief that someone else will save it. We all must do our bit. So with that, I'm going to stop the slide share.
Wow. Thank you so much. This has been quite revealing, and some of your assessment can be disturbing to say the least. And so, but sometimes people wonder, listening to experience just like you've shared, and perhaps someone is asking, what can they do? How can people be part of some of these responses?
Yeah. Uh, I think one of the most important things that people can do is to continue the conversation. Now, we are all part of social networks, and when we talk with our friends, when we talk with the people we are connected on social media, uh, we may not realize that uh, a vast majority of the people in the world are actually totally unaware of climate change, the impacts, and even if they are suffering from climate-related, events like extreme weather, cyclones, or floods, they may not be able to make the interconnections. The correlations are not understood. So it is very important that we communicate climate change, and only when the people understand, only when the conversation is reflected in television, in newspapers, in magazines, when it's a part of everyday discourses, only then the political leadership will take note, and only then we can expect decisive climate action. So I think the most important thing for all of us should be to make it our purpose in life as much as we can to keep the conversation going. That is the most important part. And the second thing is that many people think that it is hopeless. The situation is as good as lost. That is not true. Number one, we have the solutions at hand, and I'm not just talking about solar and wind and biomass. The renewable energy sources are there. The potential is immense. If we can harness it, it's going to be a very easy to control the warming over a period of time. But even more than that, there are huge technological advancements, many of them which actually take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There are other ocean-based technologies that are coming up. Uh, of course, there is a lot of gap in terms of climate finance, and that is because uh, I think the priorities are not being set by the political leadership. They are not giving the problem, the existential crisis of climate change, the urgency that is required. I mean, if all the countries in the world decide not to spend anything on, say, defense for 1 year and
Mm,
allocate their defense
mm,
budget
mm,
to climate change, I think that's the biggest defense that's required. And if that is done, I think a lot of the climate finance challenges would be met, and then that will in turn address a lot of that funds that we require for technology, the funds that we require for ensuring climate justice. I think all that can be addressed by similar kind of initiative, but that has to be done by the world leaders.
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's quite instructive. You made mention of some of the things that individuals could do, like getting the conversation going. You also spoke about creating some form of systemic change through policies and governance. And I wonder, you also mentioned the role that technology plays in this. Can you briefly explain to us what are some of the nature-based solutions or adaptive solutions that individuals who, if I'm from community where I don't have access to such technologies, but what are those things that are available to me that they are nature-based strategies that I can adopt?
Yes, I think nature-based solutions are a big part of the the entire strategy. And one of the reasons that one of the things that people have been talking about in recent years is how biodiversity loss is connected. For example, in the oceans, the biodiversity loss is totally related to how much of carbon dioxide is being absorbed, how much of so these interconnectivities has to be explored. For example, in the rainforests of the world, where so much destruction, deforestation is going on, leading to more emissions in of you know greenhouse gases. It is important not only to halt deforestation, and most of it is illegal, by the way. Uh, and in some countries, it is also seen that after the COVID-19, especially, uh, governments are trying to facilitate business by easing regulations that allow exploitation of forested areas. You are making it easy to go and coal mine or take out timber or other forest resources. So all these is the wrong way. What we need to do is ensure that primary standing forests are protected and degraded lands are restored. In fact, biodiversity loss is catastrophic, and it is very important that biodiversity loss is arrested, because the health of human beings is very important. The welfare of human beings is very connected to survival of biodiversity. In fact, the Convention on Biological Diversity, uh, when they published the zero draft for a post 2020 framework in January, and uh, as well as the recent biodiversity conference, has confirmed that we need to protect 30% of all land areas and 30% of all uh, oceanic areas to stop the catastrophic loss of biodiversity. And to do that, we have to go for restoration of degraded lands, whether it's i- i- you know on all the continents. In fact, at the same time, when we talked about the marine Arctic peace sanctuary maps, that's going to ensure protection of that 30% that we are aiming at. Others talk of protecting half the planet. Even then, I think protecting vital areas like Antarctica, the Southern Ocean, the Arctic. I think these are very important.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of other nature-based solutions that we have to look into. For example, regenerative agriculture, and ensuring that uh, you know uh, rivers are not diverted or dammed, and let basically you ensure that nature is restored. You try to rewild the degraded areas so that people and nature can live together, thrive uh, in a in the symbiotic relationship that was meant to be there but has been degraded in the last few decades.
Thank you so much. What some of my audience on this show have shared with me some of the frustrations they have doing this work. What has been some of your experience? What are the pushbacks that has come that you've encountered in this course?
Well, yes, there are so many. I mean, some of them are related to what we just talked about. Uh, on the one hand, we know what deforestation could do for biodiversity loss as a consequence to the emissions of more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Uh, However, knowing all that, we still have people, leaders, facilitating the exploitation of this, natural resources and deforestation. And in some of the most biodiverse rich areas, some of the most vital areas like the Amazon, and other rainforest areas, where the leaders are making it easy for exploitation of natural resources. So that's hugely frustrating. In fact, rollback of protection measures, which you have seen, most prominently in the US, but also in other countries. in different forms, in different regulations being brought about, changes in the law. So I think all that is very frustrating, especially when you know and all the scientific evidence is there. Reports are coming out, new and new reports are coming out. The people want change. People are out on the streets, and your leaders actually go to do the opposite. So that is very frustrating.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate your coming to on this show to share your experience, your expertise, and also your passion with us. And in conclusion, there's a word of there's a poem, and I like sharing with my guests on this show. It goes with a lot of positive vibe. It's call it prayer, call it goodwill, because I know that in the course of what we are doing, sometimes some people see that it's not a job that you get thanks for, and sometimes you not get adequately compensated. And so we just want to wish you well in what you do, and I'd like to read this briefly to you and to say thank you for all that you've done, and thank you to all people who have moved in their lives to heal and to protect the earth in small and in large ways. We say blessing on the composters, the gardeners, the breeders of worms and the mushroom, the soil builders, those who cleanse the waters and purify the air, and all those who have cleansed up the messes that others have made. Blessing on all those who heal the cities, who bring the cities alive again with excitement and creativity and love. Blessing and gratitude to all who stand against greed, who risk themselves, to those who have bled and have been wounded, and to all those who have given their lives in the service of the earth. So, Mr. Richard, thank you so much. I wish you well in all that you do, and I hope that we get a chance sometime in the future to talk about many more, issues around what you do and around climate change.
Thank you. I think your closing words, verses were very powerful and so very important. All of us must have the faith, the belief that we can make the difference. Thank you to all the viewers, and thank you for having me here. Bye.
Yeah. Okay, viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. This is another opportunity to hear from voices from the front lines, people who are working in different areas to resolve one of the most important crises to the planet and crisis to ourselves, and a threat to the future of our children and their own children in tomorrow. So, like I usually try to bring on this platform voices of earth champions, people who have gone out of their ways to create a change. And you've heard from our guests today, and I hope that there's one or two lessons that you've learned. Beyond just learning, please get involved, be practical. We need the earth needs more of our action than the words. And for our guest today, he's not only spoken about it, he has lived that action. And again, next week, we'll be coming your way with another earth champion on this opportunity for people to share their climate stories so that you can be inspired also to take a lead, however small, in your community, among your friends, and in your nation. So that will be it that'll be all for today. Until next week. Until then, please go out and take care of the environment. Go out and preserve biodiversity. Bye bye.